It was a typical day, or so I thought. My daughter, who has been dependent on oxygen for most of her life, was just trying to breathe like any other child would. The sound of her oxygen machine, a constant companion in our home, was comforting like a lifeline. But when I walked into the room that day, I saw something that left me frozen in disbelief. My daughter's oxygen tank, the one that helped her live, had been switched. The new tank wasn't what it seemed. It wasn't oxygen, it was helium. And the person who had done this? A woman we barely knew. Someone who thought it would be fun to see what would happen. Just for a laugh. I couldn't believe it. The woman who had no idea of the risks had made a choice that could have cost my daughter her life. At that moment, my heart raced and a wave of panic hit me. I rushed to my daughter's side, watching her struggle to breathe, wondering if I was too late. What had just happened and why? The next few minutes were some of the scariest of my life. What happened next, though, no one could have predicted. The gravity of the situation soon unfolded in ways that will leave you speechless. This isn't just a story about a careless act. It's about a parent's worst nightmare, a battle for life, and the terrifying consequences of one person's recklessness. Stick with me, because this story is far from over. You won't believe what happened next. My daughter, Lily, is the most precious thing in my life. She's only 10, but she's already had to endure more challenges than most of us will face in a lifetime. Lily was born with a condition that affects her ability to breathe on her own. The oxygen tank that sits by her bedside is more than just a piece of medical equipment. It's her lifeline. It's the reason she wakes up every day, the reason she can go to school, play with her friends, and live as normal a life as possible. Without it, she's at risk. The constant hum of that oxygen machine has been a reassuring sound in our home for years. Every time I hear it, I feel a bit of peace knowing she's okay. I've always been her protector, her advocate, and her biggest cheerleader. Our days follow a routine that keeps her safe. Every morning, I check her oxygen levels, make sure her tank is full, and adjust the machine to her needs. It's a rhythm we've settled into. Even though we've been through so much, Lily has always been a trooper. She's got this resilience that I admire every day. She never complains about her condition. Instead, she gets up, does her schoolwork, plays with her friends, and brings joy to everyone she meets. I've always tried to keep her life as normal as possible, even though the circumstances are anything but. But as normal as our days might seem, we live with the constant reminder that things can change in an instant. I never take my eyes off her, constantly checking to make sure her oxygen is running, making sure she's breathing properly. That's the life of a parent with a child who needs medical assistance, always watching, always aware that things could go wrong. That's why I never let my guard down. Or at least that's what I thought. Then came Karen. Karen had been a neighbor for a few months, someone who lived a few houses down. At first, she seemed friendly enough, maybe a little too curious but harmless. She'd often stop by to chat, ask questions about Lily's condition, and offer unsolicited advice. It wasn't that I disliked her, but there was always something off about the way she asked. She would make strange comments like, "Wow, I can't believe how much you rely on that oxygen tank. What if she could breathe without it? Wouldn't that be something?" I always shrugged it off, thinking she was just being ignorant, trying to relate without fully understanding. What I didn't know was that Karen's curiosity was more than just idle chatter. She had been watching our routines, seeing how reliant we were on the oxygen machine. And that's when her twisted idea started to form. She saw Lily's vulnerability as a game, a way to satisfy her curiosity at someone else's expense. Karen's motives weren't clear to me at the time, but the more she hung around, the more she seemed to enjoy pushing boundaries, making comments that would rub me the wrong way. But I never expected her to go this far. The day it happened started off like any other. Lily was playing in the living room while I was doing some work in the kitchen. Karen had stopped by, as usual, but this time she seemed oddly insistent on talking to me about Lily's health. She wanted to know everything. How much time Lily spent on oxygen, whether there was any chance she could breathe without it. I remember thinking, why is she so obsessed with this? What I didn't know was that while I was distracted, Karen had made her move. She entered the room where Lily was, and in an act of sheer recklessness, she swapped out the oxygen tank for one that contained helium just to see what would happen. She thought it was harmless, a little experiment, but it was far from harmless. Little did I know. My daughter's life was hanging in the balance, and Karen had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. The moment Karen walked out of the room, everything seemed normal. Lily was sitting on the floor, playing with her toys, the sound of her oxygen machine humming softly in the background. I thought nothing of it. I had seen Karen around the house before, and I trusted that she wouldn't do anything that could harm Lily. I figured she was just being nosy, asking questions she shouldn't have been, but that was it. I had no idea that, in that brief moment, she had made a decision that could change everything. I didn't even notice at first. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch for Lily, and the house was quiet, save for the familiar hum of the oxygen machine. But as I walked back into the living room to check on her, I felt something shift in the air. It was subtle at first. The sound of the machine wasn't right. It was quieter, softer, almost faint. I noticed Lily's face turning pale as she struggled to take in air. Her breaths were shallow, labored. Her body was reacting in a way that instantly triggered panic in me. At first, I thought maybe the machine had malfunctioned, or perhaps the tank was running low. I rushed over to check, but as I approached her, my heart skipped a beat. The oxygen tank was no longer where it should have been. In its place sat a small, unfamiliar cylinder. I froze for a moment, unable to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't just any tank, it was too small to be a standard oxygen tank, and it didn't look right. The tubing leading to Lily's face was still in place, but she was breathing erratically, her body beginning to tremble. I immediately grabbed the tank and examined it. Panic surged through me as I read the label. It wasn't oxygen, it was helium. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Helium, the very thing that would prevent her from breathing properly, the thing that would suffocate her if she relied on it for too long. How could this have happened? My mind raced, trying to piece together what had occurred. I turned to Lily, her eyes wide and filled with confusion as she struggled for breath, her tiny chest rising and falling violently. "Lily," I shouted, my voice trembling with fear. "What's going on? What happened?" She couldn't answer. She could barely breathe, let alone speak. Her face was flushed, and I could see the panic setting in. The confusion in her eyes was unmistakable. She didn't understand why she couldn't catch her breath, why the air she was inhaling wasn't the same as it always was. I rushed to her side, holding her as gently as I could while I tried to calm her down. In a panic, I started to rip off the tubing from her face, praying that I could get her back to normal. But the damage had been done. Helium doesn't help the body breathe. It only fills the lungs without providing the necessary oxygen. I could already see the signs of hypoxia in her lips beginning to turn blue, her fingers trembling, her body becoming weaker by the second. I ran to the phone and dialed emergency services, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely hold the receiver. "Please," I begged them, "my daughter, she can't breathe. Something's wrong. You have to help us." The minutes that followed felt like hours. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my own breath tightening with anxiety. I kept looking at Lily, watching as she struggled to keep herself together, her body shaking violently. I knew I needed to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear, unsure of how much time we had before things became irreversible. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. I heard the sirens in the distance, but it felt like an eternity before they reached our house. I could see the fear in Lily's eyes, the terror as she realized that she wasn't getting the air she so desperately needed. The longer she struggled, the more frantic I became. I knew this wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a life or death situation. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the nagging question, who did this to her? As the paramedics finally burst through the door, I could barely speak. The scene unfolded in front of me like a blur. They immediately took control, assessing Lily's condition, hooking her up to a portable oxygen tank, and administering treatments to stabilize her. The sound of her breathing slowly began to normalize as the oxygen flowed into her lungs. Still, the damage was done. The fear of what might have happened haunted me. What if we hadn't caught it in time? What if Karen's careless act had been the end of it? It wasn't until the paramedics started questioning me that I pieced together what had truly happened. Karen, the tank, the helium. My mind went back to the moments leading up to the event, replaying every word Karen had said earlier, every odd question she asked. I hadn't realized it at the time, but she had been probing, almost as if she was waiting for the opportunity to strike. The truth hit me like a punch in the gut. Karen hadn't just made a mistake, she had knowingly switched the oxygen for helium, taking the life of my child into her hands as if it were some sort of experiment. It wasn't just negligence, it was cruelty. The paramedics worked quickly, but I could see the lingering concern in their eyes. They knew just how close we had come to disaster. One of the paramedics spoke to me in a calm but serious tone. "You're lucky she's still here." Helium in the lungs, especially in someone with a respiratory condition, could have been fatal in just a few minutes. The air around me seemed to tighten. I could hear my own breath, shallow and unsteady, as if I was reliving the same fear all over again. The sirens that had seemed so distant were now a steady reminder of how close we had come to losing everything. As they rushed Lily to the hospital for further monitoring, my thoughts raced back to Karen. I couldn't understand how anyone could be so reckless, so careless with someone else's life. How had she thought this was okay? What kind of person would do something like this? But the answers didn't come, and in that moment, nothing could soothe the pit of fear that had formed in my stomach. I had no idea where Karen was. Had she gone home? Was she aware of the damage she had caused? The questions lingered in my mind as I sat next to my daughter's hospital bed, watching her sleep fitfully, hooked up to machines, her small body still recovering from the ordeal. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and every second that passed felt like a countdown to something more dangerous. What had started as a moment of curiosity, a harmless experiment, had spiraled into a nightmare. And it wasn't over yet. The true weight of Karen's actions had yet to be revealed. I sat in the sterile, dimly lit hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of the machines keeping time with my heart. My daughter, Lily, was lying in the bed, her small frame looking fragile beneath the thin hospital sheets. A soft, sterile mask covered her face, delivering the oxygen she so desperately needed. I couldn't look at her without feeling a tight knot in my chest, a mix of fear, anger, and helplessness. The fight to keep her alive, to protect her from harm, had never felt more real, more raw. And yet, the cause of all this was so senseless, an action born from carelessness and ignorance. Karen had no idea what she had done to us. How could she? The doctor had left us to rest, but I couldn't rest. I kept thinking about what had happened, the terrifying minutes of panic, the slow realization that we were fighting for Lily's life because someone had switched her oxygen tank with helium, just to see what would happen. And I kept asking myself over and over again, how could someone do this to a child? To my daughter? My mind flashed back to the chaos of the moments before the paramedics arrived. I remember looking at Lily, her tiny body trembling as she struggled to take in a breath that wasn't there. The fear in her eyes was so raw, so pure. A child who had never truly understood the fragility of her own existence was now confronted with the reality that she couldn't breathe. And the worst part was that she didn't know why. She just knew something was wrong, and I could do nothing but watch her slip further away from me. When I dialed emergency services, my hands were shaking, my voice barely a whisper as I told them what was happening. It felt like time had stopped, like the world around me had gone mute except for the sound of Lily's labored breathing. I had never been so scared in my life. I had never felt so utterly powerless. You see, as a parent, you're supposed to be the protector. You're supposed to be the one who can make everything better. But in that moment, I realized how fragile that belief is. You can't protect them from everything. And that realization tore me apart. But I had to be strong. For Lily. For the sake of keeping it together, I had to pretend that I was okay, even as my world was crumbling. I had to act quickly, despite the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I couldn't let Lily see how terrified I was. Instead, I focused on what needed to be done, getting the right oxygen back into her lungs, keeping her calm, keeping her alive. As the paramedics worked swiftly, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief that help had finally arrived, that she was going to be okay, eventually, but guilt, too, because there was nothing I could have done to prevent this from happening. I trusted the wrong person. I had let my guard down. And now my daughter was paying the price. The guilt ate at me, gnawing at me like an unbearable weight, suffocating me more than the helium ever could. In those few minutes, I saw my daughter in a way I never had before. She wasn't the brave little girl I had always known, the one who faced each day with a smile, the one who never once complained about the cards she'd been dealt. No, in that moment, she was just a scared, vulnerable child who had no idea why she was gasping for air. Her tiny face, once full of hope and determination, was now marked by confusion and terror. And all I could do was hold her, whisper to her, and pray that she would make it through. But I couldn't help but wonder, how much longer would she have been able to breathe if I hadn't walked in at that moment? How much longer would she have lasted if I hadn't caught on to what was happening? The thought that Karen's thoughtless curiosity could have killed her. It's almost too much to bear. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Lily, one of them leaned in and said softly, "You're lucky. If it had been a few more minutes, things could have been much worse." Helium doesn't provide oxygen, it just fills your lungs with a gas that your body can't use. It's suffocating slowly, without you even realizing it. That's why we're here today, getting her back on track. I nodded, still in shock, not fully grasping the gravity of the situation. I was so focused on Lily that I couldn't even process the full impact of those words. "You're lucky. A few more minutes." The words kept echoing in my mind, spinning around, getting louder with every passing second. We had come so close to losing her, to losing everything that mattered to me. And in that moment, as I sat there, gripping Lily's hand, I couldn't stop thinking about Karen. How could she not have understood the gravity of what she was doing? How could she have just taken a tank, any tank, and switched it without thinking about the consequences? How could she have known that she was playing with my daughter's life? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I wanted to understand, to somehow make sense of this madness, but I couldn't. The act itself was senseless, reckless, and selfish. She didn't see my daughter as a person. She saw her as an experiment, something to be toyed with, something to entertain her curiosity. And that thought made my blood run cold. I thought about all the times she had asked questions that now seemed so intrusive, all the little comments she had made about Lily's condition. What if she didn't need the oxygen anymore? What if she could breathe on her own? I'd always dismissed them, thinking she was just curious, maybe a little clueless about the seriousness of Lily's condition. But now I realized how wrong I had been. Karen wasn't just uninformed, she was dangerous. And that realization hit harder than anything. And then I thought about Lily again. I thought about the strength she had shown, even in the face of something so terrifying. I thought about how, despite everything, she had made it through. She was breathing again. She was going to be okay. And that was the one thing that kept me going, knowing that I had her and she had me. No matter what came next, no matter what Karen had done, we would survive this. We would fight. But I needed answers. I needed to confront Karen, to understand why she had done this. No one was going to hurt my daughter like that again, not on my watch. I felt my anger rising, bubbling to the surface, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel it fully. My daughter's life was not a joke, not an experiment. I would make sure Karen understood that. What would you do in my shoes? What would you do if someone threatened your child's life? If they didn't even realize the weight of their actions, would you forgive them? Would you be able to move on, knowing that they had put your child in danger just for their own curiosity? Or would you demand justice, make sure they understood what they had done? I don't know what Karen thought would happen. I don't know if she realized how close she came to taking everything from me. But I do know this. I'll never forgive her for what she did to my daughter. No parent should ever have to face the terror of watching their child struggle to breathe, knowing that the person responsible for it didn't even care enough to think twice. As the night wore on and Lily slowly regained her strength, my mind stayed sharp, focused. There was still so much to do. I still had to find answers, and I was ready to fight. No one was going to hurt my daughter again, not without facing the consequences of their actions. And I couldn't help but ask myself, what would you do if this were your child? Would you stay silent, or would you make sure they knew the cost of their recklessness? The next day, I could barely sleep. My mind raced with a million thoughts, each one more frantic than the last. The situation had calmed, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. Lily was stable now, thank God, but I couldn't forget what had happened. The thought of Karen's actions, how she had jeopardized my daughter's life, made my blood boil. How could she be so reckless? So callous? I knew what I had to do. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I waited for Lily to fall asleep that evening, the rhythmic beep of the hospital machines the only sound in the room. As soon as I was sure she was comfortable, I grabbed my phone and called Karen. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed the number. I didn't know what I would say to her, but I knew this conversation was long overdue. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello. Karen's voice was casual, almost too casual given the gravity of the situation. I barely managed to keep my voice steady as I spoke. Karen, I need to talk to you. Right now. About what happened yesterday. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then she sighed, her tone taking on a defensive edge. What do you mean? I've already explained everything. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. You switched my daughter's oxygen tank for helium. You put her life at risk, Karen. Do you understand that? You don't just do that to someone's child, not without realizing the consequences. I heard her shift on the other end of the line. Look, I thought it would be harmless. I was just curious. I didn't know it was going to cause all that. I cut her off before she could finish, my anger boiling over. You didn't know? I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. You didn't know? You thought it would be fun to experiment with my daughter's oxygen tank? You put her life in danger for your own amusement, and you're standing there telling me you didn't know? There was a long pause before Karen finally spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost apologetic. I didn't think it would go that far. I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't realize how serious it was. The apology, if you could even call it that, fell flat. My blood still boiled, and every word she spoke seemed like another attempt to downplay the seriousness of what she had done. Sorry isn't enough, I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rage that was threatening to consume me. Do you realize that what you did could have killed her? You put her in a life-threatening situation because you were curious. That's not something you can just apologize for and move on from. Karen's voice wavered a little, and I could tell she was starting to understand the gravity of what she had done. I don't know what to say. I didn't mean to hurt her. I swear. I never thought. Stop. I interrupted, unable to listen to any more of her weak excuses. The point is, you did. You hurt her. You almost took her life away. And now you have to face the consequences. I'm not going to let this go. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, my words settling in. The truth was, I didn't know what I was going to do next. I didn't know if confronting Karen would bring me any peace or if it would change anything. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this woman get away with what she had done. My daughter's safety and well-being came first, and I had to make sure Karen understood the full extent of her actions. I'm taking this to the authorities, I told her firmly. You're not going to get away with this. You need to be held accountable for what you did. There was a long pause, followed by a shaky sigh from Karen. Okay, she whispered. I understand. I'm sorry. I'll accept whatever happens. After a few more words, I ended the call, the weight of what I had just done settling heavily on my chest. I had confronted Karen, but the anger still churned within me. I didn't know if it was enough, but I had taken the first step toward ensuring that she would face the consequences of her actions. In the days that followed, I reported the incident to the police and filed a formal complaint. The authorities launched an investigation, and Karen was questioned about her actions. The whole situation was messy, uncomfortable, and emotionally draining. But I knew it was the right thing to do. As a parent, I couldn't let someone get away with putting my child's life in danger. I needed to stand up for Lily to make sure she was safe and to make sure that Karen understood just how serious this had been. As the investigation continued, I reflected on the broader implications of what had happened. What did this say about trust, about responsibility, and about the ways we interact with those around us? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Karen's reckless behavior. It was about the human tendency to take things for granted, to assume that nothing bad will happen until it's too late. Karen hadn't intended to hurt Lily, but that didn't make her actions any less dangerous. She had been careless, and in her carelessness, she had jeopardized a life. It also made me think about the importance of being vigilant, of protecting those who are vulnerable, especially when they cannot protect themselves. In my case, my daughter's condition made her vulnerable, but it also made me hyper-aware of the dangers that can lurk even in the most innocent-seeming situations. I had trusted Karen because she seemed harmless, because she was just another neighbor who wanted to get to know us. But trust, as I had learned the hard way, is a fragile thing. It takes only one moment of carelessness for it to be shattered, and once that trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild. The situation also taught me something about human nature. In times of crisis, people react in different ways. Some, like Karen, act impulsively, driven by curiosity or ignorance, without considering the consequences. Others, like me, are left to pick up the pieces and do whatever it takes to protect their loved ones. It made me realize how important it is to take responsibility for our actions, to understand that every decision we make has a ripple effect, whether we realize it or not. But most of all, this experience reinforced one of the most important lessons of all, the need to care for those who are vulnerable. Lily's condition is something I can't change, but it's something I can protect her from. It's my responsibility as a parent to ensure that no one, no matter how well-meaning they may be, can ever put her in harm's way again. I would fight to the ends of the earth to keep her safe, and no amount of apologies from Karen could change the fact that she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself more at peace, but I never forgot the lessons I had learned. My daughter was safe, and Karen had been held accountable for her actions. But I couldn't help but wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't caught on in time? How many others might be out there, living in a world where their trust is taken for granted, their lives put at risk by careless actions? And as I looked at Lily healthy and recovering, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had done everything I could to protect her, and that was enough. But I couldn't help but wonder if Karen had truly learned anything from this experience. Would she ever understand the consequences of her actions? Or would she, like so many others, go through life making reckless decisions, oblivious to the impact they have on others? The truth is, I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know this: I will never stop fighting for my daughter, and I will never let anyone take her safety for granted again. With that resolution in mind, I closed the chapter on this incident, but I carried the lessons learned with me. And as the future unfolded, I remained vigilant, ready to protect, ready to fight, ready to stand up for my daughter, no matter what. The investigation was far from over. The authorities had questioned Karen, and while she had apologized, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this story than she was letting on. It was hard to believe that someone could act with such carelessness, such ignorance, and not have some underlying motive. Was it just curiosity? Was it pure boredom? Or was there something darker at play, something that had yet to be uncovered? My mind kept circling around these questions, each one more unsettling than the last. The police were doing their job, but as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was hiding something. something more than just an accident. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, her excuses, her flimsy apologies. There was a moment, a brief moment, when I had heard something in her voice, an edge of defensiveness, like she was trying to cover something up. It was subtle, but it stuck with me. And then there was the fact that in all her apologies, she never really explained why she had switched the tank. She seemed so focused on the apology itself, but she never offered any real reasoning behind her actions. What had prompted her to do something so reckless, so dangerous? I decided to dig deeper. I started by reaching out to some of the people who knew Karen, her neighbors, friends, people who had interacted with her on a more personal level. What I found surprised me. Apparently, Karen wasn't as innocent as she seemed. There were rumors about her past, about her behavior. It turned out that she had a history of making strange decisions, acting without thinking of the consequences. She had done things before, things that made people uncomfortable, but never serious enough to get her in trouble. Until now, one of her old friends confided in me that Karen had always been obsessed with testing things. She was constantly pushing boundaries, trying to see how far she could go before something broke. Whether it was her friendships, her career, or even her family relationships, Karen had always been the one to experiment, to play with fire, to see what would happen if she pushed the limits. It seemed that this time she had pushed too far. But was it really just curiosity? Or had she been testing something far darker? The more I learned, the more I realized that Karen's actions weren't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was part of a pattern, a dangerous pattern. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about her. Was she truly remorseful, or was this all just part of her trying to cover her tracks to avoid the consequences of her actions? I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. I had to understand why she had done what she had done. Because, in the end, it wasn't just about my daughter, it was about the larger implications of her actions, the impact they had on everyone around her, and what they meant for her future. I couldn't rest until I had answers. I confronted Karen one more time, but this time, I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't interested in her excuses. I wanted the truth. I wanted to know what had driven her to do something so reckless, so dangerous. And for the first time in our interactions, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. It wasn't the defiance or the excuse making that I had become accustomed to. It was something else. Something that made me realize that Karen wasn't just a careless person, she was hiding something. She was hiding the truth. I didn't do it just because I was curious, she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. I thought, I thought if I could get Lily off the oxygen, it would be like a miracle. I thought I could help her. I thought maybe if I did something extreme, something unexpected, it would fix everything. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. Fix everything? You thought you could fix her? You what? You thought switching her oxygen tank with helium would somehow make her better? Karen looked down, her hands fidgeting nervously. I don't know. It was stupid. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted to make things better for her. I wanted to be the one to save her. I wanted to do something for her, to prove that I could help, to prove that I wasn't just some random person who came into your life and caused trouble. I wanted to make a difference. A chilling silence filled the room as the weight of her words sank in. It wasn't just carelessness. It wasn't just ignorance. Karen had been trying to play the hero, to be the one to fix something that wasn't hers to fix. She had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. She hadn't just switched a tank, she had gambled with my daughter's life because she wanted to prove something to herself. She wanted to feel important, wanted to feel like she had the power to change the course of someone's fate. And she didn't care about the cost. My daughter had been nothing more than a pawn in her misguided attempt at heroism. The realization hit me harder than anything else. All this time, I had been angry with her for being reckless, for being careless. But in that moment, I understood that there was something even more dangerous at play. Karen wasn't just dangerous because she had acted without thinking. She was dangerous because she thought she could control the situation, thought she could be the savior. And that, in a way, made her more dangerous than anyone else I had ever encountered. I don't know how to make up for this, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to hurt her. I shook my head, trying to steady myself. You've already done enough, Karen. What you did can't be undone. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. You don't get to play the hero here. My daughter's life is not something to be experimented with. You crossed a line, and now you have to face the consequences. She didn't argue. She didn't try to justify herself any further. The silence between us was thick with the weight of her admission, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how selfish and reckless she had been, but part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. What had been done could never be undone. I walked away from that conversation, knowing that Karen would never fully understand the gravity of what she had done. Her actions had been driven by something far more complicated than just carelessness. But it didn't matter. She was still going to be held accountable, and she was still going to face the consequences of her actions, whether she understood it or not. As I walked back to Lily's hospital room, I couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. I thought about the fragility of trust, the consequences of playing with someone else's life, and the idea of control. What had driven Karen to believe that she had the right to make decisions about my daughter's life? And what does it say about the world we live in that someone could think they had the power to change something so fundamental without understanding the risks? The truth is, life is fragile. People are fragile. And sometimes we make decisions based on our emotions, based on what we think is right, based on our misguided desires to control or fix things. But we don't always see the bigger picture. We don't always understand the consequences of our actions until it's too late. As I sat next to Lily, holding her hand, watching her breathe steadily again, I knew that I had to protect her. I had to keep her safe. I had to make sure no one could ever do this to her again. The world is full of people who believe they can fix things, who think they have the answers, but the truth is, they don't. They don't understand the full picture. They don't see the risks. And the consequences are never as simple as they seem. This story doesn't end here. There are more lessons to be learned, more truths to be uncovered, and more people to hold accountable. The world is full of people who think they can play with other people's lives, who think they have the right to change things to make things better. But in reality, they are just as fragile as the rest of us. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have confronted Karen? Would you have held her accountable for what she did? Would you have trusted someone who had shown you the dangerous side of their character? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And as for me, this isn't the last story I'll be sharing. There's so much more to this journey, more lessons to learn, more challenges to face, and more truths to uncover. So stay tuned. This is just the beginning. If you've made it this far, you know just how important it is to stay vigilant and protect the ones we love. This story is a reminder that we can't always trust those around us, and we must take responsibility for our actions, especially when it comes to the well-being of others. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Do you think Karen's actions were justifiable, or should she face the consequences? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about accountability and trust. Make sure to subscribe to HOA Denied Access for more real-life stories, shocking revelations, and personal experiences like this one. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means everything to us as we continue to share the truth and stand up for what's right. Stay tuned for more. This journey is far from over.